The United States of America is facing an emergency tonight. And no, it is not the emergency of the clock ticking to midnight without legislated funding for the American government. We've seen that clock tick to midnight before on nights like this. The emergency the United States of America is facing tonight is an emergency the United States of America has created for the world. And that emergency is that the President of the United States, in his public appearance today, proved that he is mentally incapable and emotionally incapable of fulfilling his constitutional duties as President of the United States. In other words, there is no President of the United States as we knew it. There is no functioning intelligence, no functioning judgment mechanism within the mind of the current holder of the title, President of the United States. And that person is also the holder of the nuclear codes that could destroy the planet in seconds. And he is, much to the horror of the commanding officers of the American military who listened to him today, the commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the history of the world. Much of the news media made the mistake of believing that all of the American commanding generals and admirals were being summoned to Quantico, Virginia, to listen to the small man of small experience who is currently the Secretary of Defense. That was obviously a fraudulent reason for demanding that all the generals and admirals fly from all over the world, leaving their command posts, to listen to a speech. It was obviously always just a setup for Donald Trump to harangue that audience with what turned out to be stream of consciousness madness, complete with hallucinations and an endless stream of pathological lies. A group of officers who earned their jobs in ways that Donald Trump never could, had to sit there and listen to a clown who stood before them in what appears to be a homemade brew of orange makeup slathered all over his face because he thinks it makes him look better. And I guess maybe we should accept Donald Trump's judgment about that one thing, that the madman orange makeup he slathers on himself makes him look better. Maybe it does. We don't know. Maybe the actual sight of the actual color of his 79-year-old skin is much worse than the orange clown confection that he chooses, but we don't know. Or maybe the orange junk on his face is yet another proof that the man has no.
The United States is facing an emergency tonight, one more serious than any countdown clock in Congress. Because what happens when a country reaches midnight? But the real problem isn't funding or legislation, but the possibility that the person in charge of the nuclear codes is no longer capable of leading. For the first time in modern history, senior lawmakers are openly suggesting that America may not currently have a functioning president. And the reason they're saying that isn't hidden in some classified report. It played out right in front of the cameras today, where millions watched a president who appeared confused, unstable, and unable to complete a coherent thought. That moment sparked a chain reaction in Washington, one that now has senators demanding immediate removal under the 25th Amendment. But the spark that truly ignited this firestorm wasn't today's public appearance. It was a message Donald Trump sent days earlier that stunned foreign leaders, rattled senators, and convinced many that something was very wrong inside the Oval Office. And that message, believe it or not, involved the Nobel Peace Prize and Greenland. What happened next sent Washington into a panic and pushed senators to a breaking point, because once they saw the message and the logic behind it, even some who normally defended Trump quietly admitted they'd never seen anything like this before. But that wasn't the whole story. Because the moment that message hit diplomatic channels, another concern exploded overnight, one that suggested Trump's fixation on Greenland wasn't just strange, it might be dangerous. It began with a communication to Norway's prime minister. According to reports and summaries circulating among lawmakers, Trump expressed frustration over not receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, and then, in the same breath, suggested that this somehow freed him up to focus on acquiring Greenland. The leap in logic startled everyone who saw it. Rumors suggest aides were stunned by how casually he tied together two unrelated issues, an international award and the idea of seizing foreign territory. Lawmakers said it sounded less like policy and more like something you'd hear from someone who had lost their grip on cause and effect. Within hours, Senator Ed Markey publicly called for the 25th Amendment, saying this behavior showed Trump was no longer fit to carry out his duties, and he wasn't alone. A wave of Democrats echoed the same concern, that Trump wasn't just making questionable decisions. They argued he was showing signs of mental impairment, exactly the scenario the 25th Amendment was designed to address. But it didn't stop with one message. Because once lawmakers dug deeper into Trump's recent comments, They realized his fixation on Greenland wasn't an isolated moment of frustration. It had become something far stranger, something that senators claimed posed a real threat to national security, and what happened next only made the situation worse. Over the last several months, Trump's interest in Greenland had shifted from curiosity to something more intense. Reports circulated that he'd revived old ambitions to purchase the territory, but senators say the concern escalated when Trump began speaking as though Greenland were a rightful extension of American territory, something he believed the U.S. should claim, even if Denmark refused. Lawmakers claimed his comments suggested he viewed the island as something he was entitled to. Some senators went even further, warning that Trump had hinted at force, although any such statement remained speculative and framed only through congressional interpretations. But the fear was real. If Trump genuinely believed Greenland should belong to the U.S., what would stop him from acting impulsively? This wasn't just a political fight. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a NATO ally. Any aggressive move toward it would spark a crisis unlike anything modern NATO has faced. And that realization brought something rare: bipartisan concern. Senators from both sides privately acknowledged that Trump's fixation had passed the point of harmless talk. The question wasn't whether he might escalate, it was whether he fully understood what such an escalation would mean. But that wasn't the only pattern troubling lawmakers. Because when they looked beyond Greenland, they saw something else: a string of military decisions that no longer looked like isolated events. One of the clearest examples was Trump's recent Special Forces operation in Venezuela. Lawmakers had already criticized it as unauthorized and reckless, with many saying they were blindsided. Now, with the Greenland situation unfolding, they saw something even more alarming. They believed Trump was developing a pattern, acting militarily without the usual checks, driven more by impulse than strategy. NATO allies reportedly expressed concern that this same model could be used elsewhere. If Trump could deploy forces into Venezuela without congressional approval, what would stop him from doing something similar in Greenland, or Cuba, or anywhere else he fixated on? Senators argued that this wasn't just bad judgment. It was a sign that Trump was no longer operating within normal boundaries, and so they acted. A resolution to block any military move toward Greenland was drafted almost immediately, designed to force Trump to seek congressional approval before deploying any troops. It was a legal barrier, a political warning, and a sign of just how seriously lawmakers were taking the threat. But while Congress built defensive walls, an even larger debate was erupting behind closed doors. Inside the Democratic caucus, lawmakers were divided over which path to pursue: impeachment or the 25th Amendment. Both were being discussed openly, something almost unheard of while a president was still in office. The 25th Amendment offered speed. If the vice president and cabinet declared Trump unable to fulfill his duties, he could be removed instantly. But that required cooperation from Trump's own cabinet, a group many believed would never turn on him. Impeachment, on the other hand, would take months. Hearings, investigations, a House vote, a Senate trial. But impeachment didn't require the cabinet. It only required evidence of wrongdoing, something Democrats believed they could build from a long list of issues: the unauthorized Venezuela operation, the Greenland threats, court defiance, and controversies tied to other scandals. Behind all of this was an unspoken truth: the 2026 elections could decide Trump's fate. If Republicans lost Congress, impeachment would be almost guaranteed. Democrats were preparing the groundwork now, documenting every decision, every reckless statement, every pattern of behavior that could support impeachment later. But for some lawmakers, impeachment wasn't enough. They believed the danger was immediate. And that's when the movement for 25th Amendment removal exploded. Senator Markey wasn't alone for long. Within days, multiple Democrats publicly echoed his call for Trump's removal. Some released statements, others posted direct messages urging action. What began as one senator's outcry quickly turned into a coordinated political push. And behind that coordinated push was fear. Fear that Trump's judgment was unraveling in real time. Senator Gallego introduced a resolution specifically aimed at blocking any invasion of Greenland, warning that Congress needed to wake up before it was too late. Lawmakers said privately that the situation was urgent. Not theoretical, not speculative. Urgent. And then, just as the Senate was preparing for its next move, Trump made a public appearance that sent everything into chaos. Standing at the podium, Trump described Portland as a war zone. But senators who had recently visited the city said nothing. He described matched reality. What troubled them wasn't exaggeration. It was what they called hallucinated dialogue. Statements that had no basis in any event or conversation. Observers noted moments where he struggled to recall words, paused mid-sentence, or jumped abruptly from one thought to another. Critics labeled it a cognitive collapse. Supporters struggled to explain the performance. Doctors watching from afar raised concerns publicly. Senators privately began using a word they had avoided until now: incapacity. And it was this moment that tipped many over the edge. Because if the president could no longer distinguish reality from imagination, what would stop him from treating Greenland not as an island owned by an ally, but as something America needed to seize immediately? What would stop him from deploying military forces impulsively? What would stop him from interpreting rejection of a peace prize as permission to start a geopolitical conflict? Senators argued that the danger was no longer hypothetical, it was unfolding in front of them. And so the breaking point arrived. Senators began calling openly, urgently, and repeatedly for Trump's immediate removal, not next week, not after hearings, now. They argued that the 25th Amendment wasn't optional, it was necessary. They insisted that Trump's fixation on Greenland, his erratic public statements, and his pattern of military impulsiveness made him a national security threat. They claimed he posed a risk not because of criminal acts, but because of impaired judgment, exactly the kind of scenario the 25th Amendment exists to address. Impeachment, they said, could still come later. But the danger they feared was happening now. Tonight, Washington sits in a state of uncertainty. The cabinet has not acted, and likely won't. Impeachment is being prepared, but will take time. Congress is racing to build legal barriers before the president can order anything rash. Allies are watching nervously. Senators are still pushing for removal. And America faces the unthinkable question: what happens when the person elected to lead the nation is no longer able to do it safely? This story is unfolding by the hour. If you want to stay ahead of every update, every leak, and every move from Congress, now is the time to subscribe, tap the notification bell, and join the community that refuses to look away while history is being written in real time. Your voice matters here, so like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and stay locked in as we break down every twist still to come.